Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a chance to take a little break. We'll now have a panel session which will explore insights and experiences of our four panelists who are creating spaces for constructive and unifying dialogue. So the panel consists of Maria Koleth and Rosalie Atie, who are policy officers with the Race Discrimination team at the Australian Human Rights Commission. They're currently leading the Commission's development of a national anti-racism framework. We also have Joseph Posta, CEO of Multicultural New South Wales, who's been convening the Religious Communities Forum for a number of years now. Joining us from Youth Power is the Youth and Networking Coordinator, Ryan Epondulan, who will bring Youth Power's experience in developing the Sydney Statement. And finally, we have Mateen Navidi, who is a project coordinator at the Fred Murray Community Centre, who will share about the Mount Druitt community catch-ups, which have emerged during the recent lockdown period in Sydney. So I'll hand over to our conference moderator, Atie Walker, to begin our panel session.
Thank you again, Saba. Our panelists are all part of organisations or institutions who are each carrying out such a wide array of initiatives to strengthen social cohesion in the country, and whose scope ranges from the national to the grassroots level. But all of them coalesce around a common area of learning, and that is to create spaces for constructive and unifying dialogue. So we really appreciate and welcome you all today at the conference, and that you're here to share those insights that you've gained from all the efforts that you've put into doing this. So each of our panelists will start by sharing what their initiatives look like, so that we can then explore in more detail the insights gained from the process of creating these spaces, which are conducive to open, explorative and unifying dialogue. So we might just get a glimpse into, firstly, what the Human Rights Commission is doing to create this national anti-racism framework. And so we'll first hear from Maria and Rosalie. So we'll hand it over to you both.
Thank you, Ada, and thank you to the Australian Baha'i community for inviting us to the panel today, and indeed bringing together this wonderful event. I just caught some of the earlier discussion, and I was just so heartened by the focus on bringing people together and social cohesion more generally. So as you mentioned, Ada, we've been doing some key work on the National Anti-Racism Framework. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Maria Koleth. I'm a policy officer at the Race Discrimination team, at the Commission, and I'm joined today by my colleague Rosalie Atie. And I'm actually calling through today from Darug land. I'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging on those lands, and to pay my respects to any members of First Nations communities joining us today. I'd also like to acknowledge all the First Nations knowledge holders who have been part of our journey of building the National Anti-Racism Framework so far. And I'm so glad we have this opportunity to share some of that journey with you, some of the learnings that we've had along the way about bringing together people and those kinds of constructive and consultative spaces that are so important to taking action on racism, on social cohesion, and on enhancing unity across the country. So to help us through this discussion, I might just quickly share my screen. So it was in March of this year that the Race Discrimination Commissioner called for a national anti-racism framework. The Commissioner provided a concept paper proposing guiding principles, outcomes and strategies to start a national conversation about the vision and scope of the framework. And it was really just a conversation starter because we were so aware that there was so much good work already happening across the country on racism, around additional instruments such as the National Agreement on Closing the Gap, and clearly on all of the action that's happening across the country on social cohesion as well. The National Anti-Racism Framework will be a long-term central reference point to guide actions on anti-racism and equality by government, NGOs, business, communities, and other sectors. The framework outlines a coordinated shared vision to tackle racism and foster social cohesion. Developing the framework concept paper has been a real journey for us. And from July to December this year, we've been consulting with governments, human rights agencies, peak bodies, and other strategy leaders, as we call them, in the framework outcome areas on the scope and vision for the framework. From October to December of this year, we'll be undertaking a public submissions process. From October to April, we'll be partnering with governments, organisations and strategy leaders in specific outcome areas to facilitate further conversations with communities so that all sectors can endorse the framework and contribute to its development. And in June, we'll be looking to incorporate the feedback we receive into a consultation report and a revised framework concept paper. So at this point, I'll hand over to my colleague, Rosalie, to take you through some of the process.
Thanks, Maria. And just before I start, I too would just like to acknowledge that I'm joining from Gadigal lands today, and I'd like to pay my respect to elders past and present and extend that to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community members joining us today. So in terms of our advisory groups and our advisory engagement around the framework, we have a slightly unusual kind of structure, but one which we hope really allows for the inclusion of a diverse range of experts and knowledge holders. And we've really prioritised engagement with First Nations organisations, and we've been led by their preferences for engagement formats in this regard. So we've, the First Nations peak bodies and institutes that we've spoken with have expressed a preference for a series of ongoing conversations with the possibility of some tailored partnerships designed around their core business. We also have a multicultural advisory group, and this includes representatives from national peaks representing migrant, refugee and settlement organisations, and also some associations that represent some intersectional interests, so some groups that are minoritised within those communities as well. And we have a Commonwealth Government Advisory Group. So this consists of the main government departments that have oversight over migration, security, as well as Indigenous affairs, employment, education and health, and those that have oversight over the delivery of services and government payments and in relation to broad community wellbeing. In addition to that, we have planned some faith and interfaith consultations in each state, and including national bodies as well. And then we have some planned workshops around key issues with those strategy leaders that Maria referred to earlier. And on the next slide, so broadly our approach is informed by a human rights-based approach, so in regard to the consultations and the framework itself, and these are, 5 common principles associated with that approach. So participation, and this refers to, everyone having the right to participate in decisions which affect their human rights. So participation must be active, free and meaningful, and give attention to issues of accessibility, accountability. So this, includes our own evaluation of whether we have effectively, conducted our consultations from a human rights-based approach, non-discrimination and equality, so priority being given to those who are most marginalised or, who might face the biggest barriers to realising their rights, empowerment. So individuals and communities need to be able to understand their rights, and to participate fully in the development of policy and practices which affect their lives, and finally legality, and ensuring that the law itself is consistent with human rights principles. So we've whizzed through that, but just on a final note, so and I've included this in the chat as well. If you do have any further questions, or you'd like to engage in any consultations or hear more about the framework and the public submissions that are opening up soon, there's our email address that you can reach us on. I'll hand back over to you, Atie. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much, Rosalie and Maria. I really appreciate you sharing with us what is happening with the National Anti-Racism Framework. And now I'll hand it over to Joseph Posta, who is the CEO of Multicultural New South Wales, to describe this journey that we've been on with the Religious Communities Forum. Welcome, Joseph.
Good morning, everyone. I too would like to acknowledge I'm on the lands of the Wongal people here, of the Great Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today's just really a fire starter, just to outline, as Atie said, the work that we do in our interfaith dialogue at Multicultural New South Wales. but most importantly, just an opportunity to really ask me or any of the panelists anything that you want. So we want it to be as interactive as possible. And just following on from the presentation from the Race Discrimination Commission, I'll talk pretty quickly and move quickly so that we can really have that sort of substantial and qualitative conversation. Can I first and foremost just acknowledge the Australian Baha'i community for inviting us to take part in this panel dialogue titled Creating Spaces for Constructive and Unifying Dialogue. I've been asked to speak about Multicultural New South Wales's Religious Communities Forum and how it serves the people of New South Wales as a unifying consultative space, which fits nicely with the scope of our panel discussion today. I'm very happy to talk about the Religious Forum, the good work that it does, and particularly in the last 18 months, for obvious reasons, that interfaith dialogue that we've been having has been probably critical to New South Wales's capacity to be able to respond to and navigate the current COVID pandemic. But it's also a lot richer and a lot deeper than that, and having Ryan and others here, they'll be able to talk about some of those interrelationships as well. Just some background on the forum, if I can. The Religious Community Forum aims to enhance social cohesion and to be a voice for community relations in New South Wales. It provides advice on issues of interest and concern to the religious communities of our state. Sorry about that. It has a consultative role from the very beginning. Indeed, it is one of its core functions. Multicultural New South Wales established it in 2014 to provide an opportunity for ongoing dialogue between the New South Wales government religious communities and between its members. And if you think back to 2014, there was a couple of issues that happened on a global scale, and even one here shortly after in a domestic context, that really threatened our social cohesion and our community relations. The forum's membership aims to reflect the rich diversity of people from New South Wales. And for those that don't know, we practice over 146 different faiths in New South Wales. We're incredibly religiously, culturally, and obviously linguistically diverse. Its membership includes, but is not limited to, communities such as Anglican, Buddhist, Baha'i, and a big thanks to Atie for so ably representing this important faith in recent years. It'll come as no surprise to this group, but she is one of the most popular members of that group and always brings a great balance. It also includes Coptic Orthodox, Chaldean, Catholic, Hindu, Jew, Jain, Mandaean, Maronite, Muslim, Sikh, Zoroastrian, just to name a few in terms of the composition of the group. Before COVID-19, to further foster the spirit of inclusion and consultation, meetings were hosted by members at different places of worship. And I reflect fondly on some of the meetings that we had at, say, the ASA, even at the Baha'i community up there as well. So we've had lots of different locations. Some of our mosques and churches have been beautiful places for us to be able to host. We found this was a great way for members to learn about each other's faith and the incredible work that faith-based organisations do for the community. And they're not one thing. All of our different religious organisations play largely very compassionate, very empathetic and very supportive roles for their communities and their faith groups, but they also play very different roles, with some of them providing a lot more specialist support through aged care, through Meals on Wheels, through a whole lot of different things to really help empower and support their groups. Of course, that all changed with the advent of COVID-19. But when the pandemic hit New South Wales, these flows of communication and that spirit of collaboration and the real readiness to support one another that we'd built up since 2012 soon proved their worth. Since March 2020, I, as the Multicultural New South Wales CEO and senior health officials, have actively engaged in numerous online conferences with some of our most senior faith leaders in the state to get messages out about COVID and share ideas on how to stop its spread. And sometimes I'm talking about forums that happen weekly, but also forums that happen daily. You know, and there were some certain groups last year, particularly around April, obviously being a very significant month for a lot of our religions, where we were meeting with some of these groups daily, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week if required, to really help make sure that they were empowered with the messaging and the communication and all the things they needed. Because of the relationships and the friendships we'd established and that social bond, we had an immediate rapport and we were all able to understand each other. This was of great help when, more recently, we had discussions about the importance of encouraging our state's residents to step forward to be vaccinated. It's important to note that the Minister for Multiculturalism, the Honourable Natalie Ward MLC, has also attended our online conferences and has made really important contributions. So it's great to have even the most senior political leaders involved. All this consultation has helped our religious leaders and faith communities play a critical role in supporting their communities throughout this pandemic. I'm also really proud that the Religious Communities Forum is also a force for unity and harmony. It's played an important role in publicly expressing interfaith solidarity. And, you know, I reflect on some of our most challenging times, particularly with the terrorist attacks in Christchurch and Sri Lanka in 2019 and the synagogue attack in San Diego. Our members held interfaith memorial services to represent within their respective places of worship for victims, and circulated messages of unity and condolence and condemnation right across their various different faiths. In March this year, and really pleasingly, it's great to see Ryan on the call, who worked very closely with Father Patrick and others. Some of that membership was on show, and I won't steal Ryan's thunder, but to have the Sydney statement at the Sydney Town Hall was just another one of those significant milestones which we played a small role in. And that's one of our critical compact programs, which I'm sure Ryan will touch on more. Can I just be clear? The New South Wales government aims to make our state a beacon of interfaith harmony. The Religious Community Forum is one, but a really important part of that ecology that we look to build and maintain and really nourish to really foster social cohesion and community relations in our state. And can I just say, other than being a great way to learn a lot, it's also been a wonderful opportunity just to engage with some really decent, proactive, and really solid humans. And so just on behalf of us, before I close, my thanks again to the Baha'i community for everything that you're doing in terms of promoting interfaith dialogue, and also just acknowledging the millions of Baha'i right across the world in marking the centenary of obviously the very significant death of Abdul Baha as well. So, of course, I could go and talk about Abdul Baha for a while, but I won't. Ultimately epitomised being a kind and gentle soul. And I think that legacy is really created through the modern Baha'i community, but also really epitomised by our interfaith dialogue. So I'll stop there and really looking forward to questions and hearing the rest of the panellists. Thanks, Ida.
Thank you, Joseph. I have really also appreciated being part of this Religious Communities Forum, and I have also learned a lot, and we've really developed beautiful friendships as well, which are lasting ones, and like you said, has really come to the fore during the pandemic, where we've all banded together to support one another and really shown that capacity of solidarity. So I will hand it over now to Ryan, who is the Youth and Networking Coordinator, who will speak to the development of the Sydney Statement through Youth Power.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ida. And I'd like to thank again the Australian Baha'i community for this opportunity. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians as well of the land where I'm coming from, Darug land of the Darug people. And so I pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. As Joseph made mention, Youth Power, or Parliament of the World's Religions, brings together young adults aged 18 to 35. And I have the pleasure of helping to facilitate that opportunity of bringing young adults together to have a voice and a vote in shaping our multicultural, multi-religious society. By meeting one another in a positive, friendly atmosphere, engaging in conversations and making shared commitments, Youth Power creates a positive experience of a multi-faith society, breaking down ethnic and religious stereotypes and building social cohesion. In fact, one of our very first Youth Power events was held in 2015 in the Baha'i Centre in Silverwater. So we are very much thankful to the Baha'i community for their continuous support in our efforts. Youth Power's most recent achievement is the Sydney Statement. And so it is an inspirational and practical interfaith charter for building bridges between believers from different religions. Over 2 years, as you can see in the photos, Youth Power generated the content. They approved the text and authorized its publication. And as Joseph made mention, it was officially launched in March 2021. And we could not do it without the support of Multicultural New South Wales in helping to facilitate and support our project. Now, the topic of social cohesion and inclusion works well with the Sydney Statement. The Sydney Harbour Bridge forms the logo of our interfaith charter. And so as the Sydney Harbour Bridge brings people of Sydney together, the idea of bridging people is key to the statement. What makes this interfaith statement unique is that not only does it reflect Sydney's cultural and religious diversity, but it involves young adults across Sydney to share their ideas, opinions, and experiences, helping to generate the content to further respect, understand, and cooperate in our world today. However, this statement is not just for Sydney, but for all people of all religious faiths and of goodwill, as a useful resource and to make a commitment to building bridges between believers from different faiths. So I'm looking forward to this conversation and in being able to share our ideas and thoughts on social cohesion and inclusion from our respective cultures, faith perspectives, and contexts.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And finally, we have Mateen Navidi, who is the project coordinator at the Fred Murray Community Centre in Mount Druitt. And he is here to speak to us and share a glimpse of what's happening with the community catch-ups, which have evolved and been established during the lockdown period.
Yeah, thanks, Ida, and hi, everyone. I'm also, like a few other panelists, speaking to you from Daruglan today. And I just wanted to quickly share about an initiative. So I'm representing the Fred Murray Community Centre, which is in Mount Druitt in Sydney. And an initiative that kind of started earlier during this lockdown period actually was this space called Community Catch-Ups. I think it's really timely to be sharing about it in the context of having spaces for constructive and unifying dialogue. It kind of started from just an informal conversation that a couple of friends were having in Mount Druitt earlier in the lockdown, where like certain topics were becoming really a source of like polarization or heated debate. We could see it on social media, and we also had friends, who had questions about, for example, like COVID, is it a hoax? And some people didn't believe that it's really a thing. Didn't really know whether they can trust the vaccinations, and there was a lot of misinformation being spread. But we just had like a discussion among a group of friends one night, and friends with different perspectives on all of this, I have to say. And we found that if it's framed in the right way, it can actually build a lot of shared understanding and actually strengthen unity. And then from this informal kind of chat that we had, we realized that there'd probably be a lot more people in Mount Druitt who would want to be part of a conversation like this. And that's kind of where we started Community Catch-Ups, which is just a weekly space that we've been having with people from this neighborhood. I think it's really nice because we've seen today, like, examples of like, this dialogue occurring at a national level, state level, and I'm bringing it right down to the neighborhood for this part. Some of the topics we've looked at, as you can see on the screen, is like role models, which is the most recent topic we kind of explored, which is quite a big topic in Mount Druitt at the moment. Like, who are our role models and what makes a role model? We also looked at the question of the need of having love and unity in the community. As I said, even when some of these topics could become a matter of like having an us and them kind of mentality in the community, we realized that if we can engage in this conversation with respect, building on the friendships that we have, it can really strengthen unity. So yeah, we've had quite a few people join these spaces, around 20 to 30 people join each week. But we've also had a nice cross section of the population of the area represented. We've had parents, youth, we've had representatives of organizations in the area. There are a couple of groups of islanders in the area who are hosting their own podcasts at the moment, where they like to explore different social issues. They've been jumping on the community catch-ups. We've had principals of schools, because there's a number of the Baha'is in Mount Druitt who are working as teachers right now in the high schools in the area. And so, bringing like essentially community leaders into the conversation has been also really nice to see. And this sense of collaboration that has stemmed from community catch-ups has been one of the most like heartwarming outcomes of the space. But yeah, maybe I'll just leave it there for now. All our intros have taken up basically the whole time of the panel. But yeah, looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for sharing, Mateen. It's been great to get a glimpse into all of these initiatives, and they all have different objectives, or it's a different conversation, because at the national level, it's slightly different from the grassroots. But, what we're seeing, or what we'll probably see in our conversation, is that there are common learnings, probably common challenges, patterns and characteristics, which we hope that the conference delegates today will be able to take away in their own endeavours to create these spaces that are also unifying, that have particular objectives and outcomes, but also that runs parallel to an objective of creating unity, not only those who are engaged in the space, but also that unity and that love and solidarity and collaboration spreads beyond those spaces, because it's one in which it can be richly cultivated. So again, we encourage the audience to please put in your questions for the panelists by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. But first, I might just also let you know that the way that we're running the panel today is that these dear friends are all here to have a conversation and build on each other's ideas. We have some focused questions, but really they're here to share their insights. We've heard about what it looks like, but also what are the deeper things that you've learnt in the whole process. So maybe we can start by looking at what are those characteristics and qualities which are essential to creating that kind of environment where the participants can come to share their thoughts, experiences, concerns and ideas, where they feel agency and ownership, in this space. So I'm happy to hand it over to whoever's would like to start. You can take yourselves off mute and start sharing, and then we can just build on those characteristics and qualities together. Okay, Mateen, go for it.
Oh, I just took myself off mute because you said to. I'm happy to share first as well. I think one of the biggest things we've learned from these community catch-ups, and one of the things that has really struck me is also, in order to reach constructive and unifying dialogue, I think there really needs to be a willingness to listen and to hear each other, and not just like, in a kind of way where it's coming in one ear and out the other, and you can kind of agree to disagree. But actually to strengthen unity and reach common understanding requires people to really want to build that together, and so I think like a few weeks ago, one of the topics we looked at in community catch-ups was freedom, which is like these are all themes that have been actually chosen by the people who are joining the catch-ups as well. So it's not like a few people are picking the topic each week for others to explore. It's themes that the people of Mount Druitt feel are really relevant to community life at the moment. And freedom is obviously a topic that's very much being spoken about, during lockdown and now as we're coming out of it as well. But, it was clear that there were people there with quite diverse perspectives, and there were divergent thoughts and opinions there. But it was really beautiful to just see how when everyone is really striving to understand what the other is saying, and also with a vision to really contribute to the betterment of our area, it was really quickly able to like build higher levels of unity among those who were participating. And it sounds like from what the other panelists were saying, like similar kind of dynamics exist
No, I think that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing, Mateen. Yeah, I really love the idea of the importance of listening. Because often when we reflect upon the conversations that we have with people, there is always something new to learn about each other, or to be able to find those hidden gems of knowledge that you had not known previously before. And I think that is essentially key to building social cohesion and inclusion, because it's by listening to each other, we are able to find ways where we can better understand, respect, and find ways where we can cooperate with each other as well.
Just wanted to also give Joseph, Muriel, or Rosalie a chance to also offer as well.
Mindful.
Thanks, Ada. And
no, please. I was about to say we've had two guys. We'll get to you guys, and then I'll chime in at the end.
Okay.
Thanks, Joseph. And thanks, Ryan and Mateen. I was just going to add to what you said so beautifully about listening. I think that's been really key to the spaces that we've created through the National Anti-Racism Framework consultations as well. And they've had to be all virtual, and I know that you face the same challenge. But I think the virtual space does allow for a different kind of listening, and to be comfortable also with sitting in silence and sitting with some of the things that have been shared by our participants has been really important. You know, we've had a great diversity of participants. We've been really lucky to have that, and bringing together these really diverse groups and in the spaces of the consultation have been really fantastic. And I think seeing that it is a space for constructive listening has been really key to getting that participation among those diverse groups, and really facilitating and prioritising the voices of First Nations stakeholders as well as different multicultural stakeholders within those consultations has been really important for us. As Rosalie shared, we've been guided by human rights principles of calls of participation and accountability and equality in structuring our consultations. But we've also been guided by culturally safe and trauma-informed principles of consultation and conversation in structuring our consultations. And so that's meant that we do sit with some discomfort, some difficult stories. There are some traumatic stories that are shared, but being able to sit with that and listen to that is really important in terms of fostering change and creating visions for change as well as we go forward. So all of these things have been really important. We like to make those values really explicit when we have our consultations, and I think doing that is really a fantastic way to put it front and center of the whole process.
And the only thing I'd probably add to all of those things is the element that binds us all is there is really only one race, and that's the human race. And so I think critical to any constructive dialogue is really the importance of humility, but also connecting people with humanity. And so reminding them that we all share a suburb, a religion, a state, a planet, fundamentally. And for us to coexist, it's critical that we find and connect with what is so similar about us all, rather than focusing or accentuating the differences that are there. The second part, I think, is all of the panelists have affirmed to me that it's not just about having well-meaning conversations, but it's also about what is the call to action. And so whether you're youth power, and it's about creating a unifying voice that is about trying to help provide a balance to what can at times be a very negative media space about the role of young people or the role of religion in young people, and looking at avenues to divide us, whether you're talking about Mateen, which is really not just about having neighbourhood conversations, but having neighbourhood conversations to help navigate a once in 100-year pandemic, and how we as a community can, or the wonderful work of the team at the Human Rights Commission, which is about tackling one of the most, the biggest scours or plagues in our society, which is racism. It's about using these forums to help better inform the policy or the views or the call to action. And I think that's the critical element for all of us. It's good to be part of well-meaning conversations, but there also needs to be some call to action for all of our communities to help us create a better society going forward.
Thank you. I might just bring it to that action aspect, and really acknowledging the contributions that you've shared create this safe space for people to explore and listen and hear ideas that may challenge their assumptions. I was actually wondering, you know, how have you gotten to the point in which that the participants feel like they're part of that decision-making process of the action moving forward? You know, what next steps that they might take, you know, ongoing initiatives. How have you created an environment where they also feel that they can share ideas and thoughts, but also have the agency to act, but also act in unity? Because sometimes you can act in parallel, but, you know, maybe even act together.
I think one of the things that we've heard from our consultation participants has been that one of the most crucial contributions that the framework can make is to build partnerships across sectors and across communities, regardless of what the outcome, or hopefully in addition to, you know, the implementation of the framework ultimately, but that along the way, our ability to maybe foster or provide space for communities to come together and to, you know, work towards these common goals together, to strategize, to plan. If we can kind of establish some of those networks and some of those spaces, we've heard that you know, is you know, a really important thing that the framework process can contribute. And so that's been something that we, you know, is constantly at the front of our minds, and we're thinking about how we can create and foster some of those spaces, and, you know, planning and setting aside time to think about some of those spaces. In terms of, you know, broader inclusion, those that we've been connecting with, we've been sharing with them our progress and the feedback that we've been receiving, so that they have, I guess, an oversight or a view to where we're at and what we've been hearing broadly from community as well. I don't know if Maria, you would add anything to that there?
Just to add that, you know, also we've been regularly scheduling follow-up meetings with our stakeholders, the people that have been involved in consultations, and doing that so that in the future they'll have a chance to also review some of the documents that we'll be preparing towards June 2022, including drafts of the revised concept paper, as well as the consultation report. Getting that ongoing feedback from them has been really important, where they have the space and the capacity to do so. We also have that oversight provided by key Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stakeholders, as well as the Multicultural Advisory Group and the Commonwealth Advisory Group as part of that decision-making process, so that the Race Discrimination Commission will be able to take all of those views, put them together and reflect on them as part of creating and releasing that concept paper and consultation report in June 2022. So it's about those ongoing opportunities. It's about that long-term process of engagement.
Beautiful. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I too agree with what Rosalie and Maria made mention in giving opportunities for people to provide feedback and to share those views. And I think that's the whole idea in creating social cohesion and inclusion, is that we give voice and opportunities to people to share their ideas, share their experiences, and share their contexts. I guess in the context of developing the Sydney Statement, back in 2019, pre the pandemic, we held 4 consultations across Sydney for young adults to come together and to share their stories and share their ideas on how we can build bridges between believers from different faiths. When the pandemic came about, we had to get creative, go into the digital sphere, and made sure that we constantly checked in with young adults by ensuring that we received their feedback on the drafts that we created for the Sydney Statement, and ensured that they had an opportunity to approve and to give their authorization in support of the Sydney Statement. And it's, again, that idea of asking for feedback, reaching out to young adults, as many as possible, is key to ensuring that people are included, are involved within the process.
I just might throw over to another question. You know, there's many of the participants here today who themselves either a part of some consultative spaces, which people are learning about one another or learning to work together, but also to create a consultative space requires a lot of courage. Like I remember for the Australian Baha'i community, when we were looking at running roundtables for this creating inclusive narrative, we were somewhat confident but hesitant to create these spaces where divergent views and some maybe very polarizing views might be brought to the space. And I'm wondering, how did you all reconcile that in your minds with the initiatives that you and your organizations have taken? Did you need to make any particular adjustments? Did you face these challenges, and how were you able to address them? Joseph.
It's a great question. And I think it comes back to fundamentals around trusting one another. And so, you know, I wouldn't make agenda item 1 of a new forum the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or I wouldn't make agenda item 1 of a forum, you know, personal views on vaccination. I'd think about ways to be able to find, again, come back to the points that we've made and even some of the great comments and questions in the chat about the concepts around humanity, what unites us, what binds us, that shared sense of, you know, one world, one planet, one community. And even in our language, we're very mindful to not talk about communities, implying there's all of these differences and trying to put people into boxes or silos to define them as being Baha'i or Chaldean or young or old or Western Sydney and not Western Sydney, which is a really good recent example. So it's about what are the things that bind us and what are the ingredients, and trying to find those commonalities. In difficult times, naturally, because there's that human bond and there's that trust and there's that understanding that, you know, my favorite color is orange and yours might be green or blue, or you might think more conservatively and you might think more progressively. That doesn't then define whether we do or don't have a friendship or a bond. That's just a recognition that we may have points of difference. And so what we have found, it is really important to build that social capital, we call it, or that social bond, and then realize that in times of difficulty, in times of crises, that you will need to draw down on that. And so right now I'm acutely aware that because of the amount of pressure that people in New South Wales have been through, and lockdowns and jobs and all of these things, that as a government, as a community, that this interfaith, this community dialogue is more important than ever. And also making sure that when the community engages with government, that we also deliver on some of the things they need around helping address accommodation issues or food shortages or these sorts of things, and walk with them, because then hopefully we can restore and rebuild that confidence so that when something bumpy does come up down the track, and it's only a matter of when, that we can then draw down on those relationships again. So my advice would be, find the things that are common, that help you bind, and then slowly, gradually introduce different ingredients that allow divergent views. And as Maria said before, divergent, different views, they're not right or wrong. They're just different. And be okay with that. Be okay with sometimes you're going to have conversations where there's going to be like, did that person really just say that? But that doesn't define that as a person. That's just their view on that matter. And so it's about then going, geez, I'd love to know why you think that. You know, and that curiosity might lead you to know that my grandfather was a fascist. Now, I have really strong anti-fascist views, but the fact that I have that as a part of my history or that journey might then inform people why someone might have that predisposition. Or if people have come from countries where war has been more prevalent or trust in government is really low, you know, and that was one of our big wrestles with the ADF coming on the ground in Western Sydney. You bring people in military uniforms into Western Sydney, how is that perceived by some of our new and emerging communities that might feel very differently about the army? And so, Ida, I think it's about just having that awareness, but being okay with difference. It's not right or wrong. It's just different.
Thank you. Anyone else? I see Mateen, you're off mute.
Yeah, I 100% agree with what Joseph's saying. I think the way we see it is finding those points of unity where everyone can, you know, band together around, and they're always there, you know. But also, like, I think it does come back to how we view, you know, how we view a natural state of interaction, like, or how we view like a community and the relationships that exist. Like, so in our community catch-ups, you know, there's always one person who's facilitating the conversation, and kind of what we've found in those spaces as well is that you know, it's nice to have like a passage or something that, you know, everyone can kind of agree on and explore, that kind of anchors the conversation. That's been some of the ways in which this points of unity can be found. Yeah, I just also wanted to mention, because I saw in the questions, you know, about also how to include people in these spaces that may be more vulnerable or not so comfortable to, like, you know, engage as well. And something we realized early on in our community catch-ups time was that we had this idea to also go live on Instagram the week after. So whenever we'd have a community catch-ups, 3 or 4 people who were part of that catch-up, and it's different people every time, will then go live on Instagram the week after. Because we had a feeling that there may be, especially younger people, who may not be either comfortable or familiar with Zoom, for starters, or secondly, they might just be shy or not want to actually, like, it might not be their thing to jump onto a Zoom call and discuss their views with others. So we went live, and the 3 or 4 people who were live would just have a conversation about the same theme that was happening at last week's community catch-up. And we actually found that lo and behold, all these younger people started tuning in, and they were engaging with the conversation, but through the comments and asking questions of their own. And I remember the week where we explored education one week as a theme, and the conversation in the community catch-up looked a particular way, but then the conversation in the Instagram live session was different, because the population that was tuning in was different, and the young people were asking more about, like, what role does education play in, you know, like lessening like gang violence and the postcode wars that have kind of intensified recently in Mount Druitt and Western Sydney. So I think that's a way of also an approach we've taken to kind of include more and more people who would be interested in even just hearing this conversation that's taking place, but they might just not want to be, like, you know, sharing their views at this point. So that's taking the conversation a different direction. Sorry, but yeah, I just want to share that in regards to the Q&A.
No, it's very helpful actually, Mateen, you know, because it's this idea of an expanding conversation that many are welcome to join, where people can share the diverse perspectives and also ask these questions of one another as well and learn from each other. So I feel like, yes, it combines these ideas of, like, having courage to create these spaces and bring the divergent views, but expanding it to people, you know, maybe not that we're connected to, you know, in our networks, maybe who aren't necessarily of like mind either, but really have a truth to come and share and explore and unpack together. So we're nearly needing to wrap up the session, but I wanted to ask Maria, Rosalie, Ryan, if you had any thoughts around this as well, because I really hope that our participants today feel that they have agency to go into their communities and their organizations and create these unifying spaces, that we leave here today with this tool of consultation and how we can apply it.
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect on what Mateen just made mention on, utilizing the Instagram live feed. I thought that was really impressive and really creative. And it just highlights that I think people want to engage in different spaces. There'll be some people who will happily engage in a Zoom call with their camera on and be part of the conversation. But then you have others who may be a bit more shy, a bit more timid, and don't want to be in the public sphere, and may just want to listen and hear the various stories that people are sharing. So it served a reminder for me that the importance of engaging in different spaces, to engage with the different needs of individuals and community groups as well.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think some of those ideas are so key to creating really inclusive spaces for diverse communities as well as vulnerable communities. I love the idea of doing that expanded conversation on Instagram Live. We'll have to take some notes on that, Mateen. So that's such a great idea. That's some of the thinking, I suppose, that's informed some of our inclusion of vulnerable communities in particular in our consultations. So we've definitely been trying to include choices about how people would like to be involved and to have those pre-conversations about, really considering the different avenues. Maybe people would like individual consultations. Maybe they'd like to have an individual consultation before a larger partnership venture, and also creating ways, we've been putting out, we will be putting out a consultation guide, creating ways that communities can themselves facilitate conversations about the anti-racism framework and feed back into our process. So it's not always the case that it's appropriate for us to be involved or for us to lead that conversation, and to facilitate that sharing and that leadership on the behalf of communities and create avenues where they can be the centre of that conversation has been really important for us as well. So as you've all been saying, expanding the conversation, creating different avenues is really key.
Thank you. Thank you to all our panellists. I think, and hopefully everyone feels this way, that we've all really also learnt from each other. And we have things to take away from just what's been shared today. And, this idea of decision-making or consultation that leads to action doesn't have to be formed in the realm of debate, or those who are the loudest speakers, or those who are most charismatic, or maybe those who are experts and those who don't know. These spaces bring together and equalize and harmonize many thoughts. And like was said by our panelists, is grounded in that understanding that we are one, that we have an earth that we share. Not one person owns this earth or owns these ideas or owns this knowledge and experience, that it belongs to all of us and we must all share in it generously. And how the spaces that you have described, that you've created, but also learning to refine, are welcoming more into this dialogue and conversation around many different themes and issues that we commonly share as well. Especially, I think the pandemic has raised that consciousness that we share many challenges in common, and that we're actually so fortunate to live in a country which is diverse, because I think that diversity helps us to be more resilient. Like a rainforest has a diverse array of plants and, its biodiversity that enables it to become strong and thriving. It doesn't actually compete with one another. It actually works in harmony together, and you're showing how we can do this in a consultative space. And I feel like that first session really grounded us in that understanding of oneness as well. And that we can draw on all of our diversity in unity and move forward to create, a life that we envisage, that we all dream of. And we can do this in this country as well. And you've given us a lot of hope. So I thank you so much for the time that you've given to this panel and the generosity of your ideas and experiences that you've shared. And please enjoy, the rest of your day. And on behalf of the Australian Baha'i community, thank you.
Thanks, Atie. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Atie. Thank you, team.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Atie.
Thanks, Atie, and thanks again to all our panelists for that great opportunity to learn, and for having that discussion that I think is so. I think it's such a great example of the sort of dialogue, respectful dialogue that's come to animate the social cohesion space. So like Atie mentioned, it's time for all of us now to actively participate in this conference. Each of you brings a wealth of knowledge, experience, and learning that we can all benefit from in order to find new ways of thinking, being, and doing so that we can, really enhance and reach greater degrees of social cohesion and inclusion throughout our country. And the COVID-19 pandemic, in addition to teaching us all how to use Zoom, has obviously created many opportunities for us to realize the imperative to work together in a more unified ways, and the panelists certainly touched on some of those interactions between the pandemic and social cohesion. And it's these ways of working together that I think the pandemic has brought to light, that make us think about, how do we do this in a more unified way to address so many of the common challenges we face as a national community. So I hope that you continue to stay on with us for the rest or for the next session, and make your contributions to this expanding conversation that we all are a part of.